Welcome to the Insights Unlocked podcast. I'm Nathan Isaacs, Senior Manager for Content Production at UserTesting. And joining us today as host is UserTesting's Leah Hogan, Principal for Experience Research Strategy. Welcome to the show, Leah.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
And our guest today is Steve Portigal. Steve is an experienced user researcher who helps companies harness the strategic power of insights. He's the author of 2 books, the classic Interviewing Users, How to Uncover Compelling Insights, and Doorbells, Danger, and Dead Batteries, User Research War Stories. He's also the host of the Dollars to Donuts podcast, where he interviews people who lead user research in their organizations. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. I'm so thrilled to be getting a chance to have this conversation with you, Steve. And where I really wanted to start is just actually because of where it is that you've been in the world of UX, user research, over the past, more than 20 years. You've had, I think, a unique perspective on how the industry has changed, how the practice has changed from earlier on until, now. And now I think that change is even accelerated, if possible. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what do you think the most significant changes have been, and how those changes have really impacted how we understand users today, and maybe how that might change.
Yeah, I can think of 3 that I'd want to mention today. So when you kind of got at this, right, we were few in numbers when I started, and, I was, the field precedes me, so even fewer in the earliest days, kind of an obscure practice, fewer people. And now we are a much more established community of practice. It's a field, it's a discipline that's larger in scope. So that means there's more of us. And the point of more of us means there's more knowledge sharing, there's more communities, there's more meetup groups, there's more books, there's more conferences, there's more podcasts. And so this community of practice means we share things, we document things, we collectively argue and debate and align or not about how to do things. We have examples of what's worked that constantly get updated as circumstances change or new things are being tried. And so that idea of a community of practice that has knowledge that shares it is not something that we relied on, maybe as strongly as we do today. I think that's one change. Another that, and I, speaking as someone who's spent his whole career in consulting, with my own agency and working in other agencies, I feel this very directly, the shift from a previous time that people may not know about, where if anyone was doing research, it was work that was being done by agencies. It was work that was being done by consultants. And just to be pedantic, I don't mean freelancers. Freelancers are often people that come into a company that take that work in a way that's similar to how a employee might work, just to finely slice some of the language. So when I think about agencies or consultants, it's separate entities, separate businesses that are contracted for a piece of work. There were not in-house research teams. There were not in-house researchers. Often there were none. There was not research leadership inside organizations that would advocate for resources, would advocate for how research should be done, would form peer relationships with heads of other disciplines and figure out how research could be integrated at the right time. And so, this change, I think, is really dramatic, although invisible to people that maybe only have X years in the field. But what I see is that's really changed kind of the politics and culture of research. And some of those changes are enormously positive, like research leadership being part of the organization. I feel there's things that have been lost or that are different. I think when research is a corporate function as opposed to kind of an external advisory function, it changes kind of the dynamics of truth to power, which is a big part of what we do as researchers. So yeah, I think that's been a shift, and most shifts have pluses and minuses to them. The last one I might bring up today is how COVID led to such a shift in remote work overall. And so remote work changes how we collaborate and the things that we do as researchers outside of research, having workshops, forming relationships that are kind of supporting this creative work are different. And then, of course, research. We've had remote research for a very, very long time. Nate Bolt wrote this book about remote research in 2010. So it had been around long enough that there was a book about it. But now remote research is the default, and I think people don't even necessarily consider that there are other modes of doing research. It's sort of a presumptive approach. And again, that has positives. Greater possibilities for inclusion in a lot of cases, geographically, if not otherwise, as well as team participation. But for sure, things are being lost when we don't ever at all go out into the world and see people and breathe the same air as them and have experiences that change us as researchers. So I'm trying not to be the everything is terrible because this has changed, but to let's be more measured and balanced about these changes. But it seems like this last one, that remote work being a default, remote research being a default, has been just so dramatic in how it's shifted what research looks and feels like for all of us, participants, researchers, people who do research, stakeholders, all of us.
Yeah, I think those are really... all of those things are also trends that I've tracked over time. And I think, just in response, it's been a wonderful thing to see Kate Towsey's book come out, because I feel like that is a real signal that just the discipline and the organization and the structure, logistical coverage that spinning up a new operation, relatively new operation in the business environment really requires. And so I'm thrilled to see that happen, especially. But I think you're right about the speaking truth to power becomes a lot harder when you're getting paid by the people who may be challenged by what it is you have to bring to the table. And then also, user testing is obviously remote first, but I definitely see still situations where it makes sense to get out there in person. And the remote part and kind of just recording that experience is very secondary to the impact that just having your mindset change because you have been in that same room is important. So that's great. Shifting gears a little bit, this is a topic area that's very close to my heart because I have used your book interviewing users in classes and with in a lot of conversations with folks over the years. And one really interesting inflection or kind of difference that you bring to the table in the latest edition is the difference between analysis and synthesis, and those being very separate activities. I'd love to hear a little bit more about why you see that difference. And, I always think about synthesis as being somewhat alchemical in nature, or it's definitely an acquired skill that requires some development over time to build. How would you recommend people improve their process to get better insights?
Right. I think maybe one of the biggest limitations that people face is not realizing that there's these multiple steps, that they're related, and not understanding that it takes time. It's really a digging in and rolling your sleeves up, other kind of cliches. So if you don't know that if you don't ask for the time, if time isn't kind of given to do that, then you never do that, right? So I think there's sort of a chicken and egg there about knowing what you need and making sure that you get that time. I think the corollary there is that researchers run the risk of acting more like stenographers, taking the requests for features and changes as literally, kind of writing that down. And then that, I think that's kind of the point of your question, right? That limits not only what we might find that's possible for our products and our services that we're designing with this data, but also just the deep understanding that we're trying to get. So I think about these two steps here. It's breaking down the information that you've gathered. That's analysis, which is essential. But then also, and I love the word alchemical. That's really a great way to think about it. And I don't think that should be an intimidating word. I think that's a liberating word. You're trying to explore in that how to recombine information into different categories. And you're trying to create a new point of view. And ultimately, you want to articulate something you're understanding that in often cases is not something that someone literally said to you. So, for example, the difference between saying, 5 out of 7 users had trouble with this task, which is important. I'm not negating the importance of that kind of information. But saying something like, here's a framework or a mental model or a 2x2 that tells us something new. That, things that go in a 2x2 are interpretive and creative, and they're produced by us. And you have to explore different ways of combining information to find one that's meaningful, that highlights something that we can do something with. And so you're asking, like, how do we do this? How do we get better at this? And I think, so first of all, doing it. I had a boss that would say, like, the best way to increase your chances of winning the lottery is to buy one ticket, right? And then you get diminishing returns after that. But I think the point there was, like, doing it makes you better than not doing it. So sort of acknowledging this and taking some time to do it is going to make, tremendous improvements for anybody. But, and again, alchemical is a liberating lens. I'm gonna try to claim that here. It's a creative skill, and I think, like lots of creative skills, you can try them on your own, but I think it's great if you can work with a mentor or a coach. Have some guidelines, and yes, these are things that I've written about, other people have talked about. There's kind of recipes that you can follow to take you into this mode of some different kind of thinking. But being in an environment, and whether that mentor or a coach or peers, I think this can also be something that you can do together. Making sure that you reflect back and get feedback, and not just kind of charge ahead without paying some kind of attention to, what does this feel like? What does this produce? What have other people kind of produced doing this, to kind of level set on this. But again, I just think, setting yourself the intention of not just reporting what people said, but creating a new framework or structure or model that kind of encapsulates that and points the way forward. I think having that intention is going to take you into a different way of working with the data that you've got if you're not currently doing that.
Wow, that's, I think, a very powerful response to that, because I think, to me, it suggests a couple of things. The first is, and I've said this myself, we often go into projects with an idea about what the output needs to look like. And I think that what it is that you're saying is, yes, there needs to be that. And you also need to be open to the high probability that there's going to be something that's really unique that's going to come out, and you need to give yourself the time and space to get there. And I think, it's real challenge in this environment where we're being asked to go faster, to carve out that time to get the space to do that work. So, yeah, what are your thoughts about, like, how do we do that? How do we win that time?
It's a perpetual challenge. And I think, I think we always feel like the time that we're in now is the time where it's hardest for resources and hardest for time and hardest for influence and hardest for buy-in. And, I think with our own time in this work, we know that we're always saying that. And so I think, it helps us to have leaders that can advocate at the highest level. I think this is a hard managing up question. But I think what researchers can do is articulate and help right size the investment versus the risk, or the investment versus the outcome. There are research questions where, hey, 5 out of 7 people had trouble with this task, and here's exactly where they had trouble. And by the way, let's workshop what the changes are they're going to get over that, and we can test those. Like, that's a perfectly fine outcome. That's well matched. But there are other types of questions that come up in organizations, business questions that lead to research questions, where, it's not just the method, it's kind of how you're going to execute it on that method. And, rather than talking about calendar time, talk about, all right, here's what you need. We can go about it a couple of different ways. If we do it this way, here's the certainty that we're going to have. Here's the risk that this leaves. If we do it this other way, we're going to have this other kind of outcome. And let's align together so that, and again, this is great when you have a manager that advocates for allocation of resources and setting priorities. I don't think we want to cast ourselves as researchers being the needy, always wanting more people. We're the people that help everybody understand the trade-offs that we're making. And, I think you can game that a little bit and say, I think there's more here. Do you want more? Can we use more, as an organization? And I think, the people that ask us for research don't know that. They don't know analysis versus synthesis in terms of user research data. They may understand this more like stenography. And, we often hear people that ask for research saying, hey, ask users what they want. So, I think it's good for us to just have some empathy for people making these understandably naive requests and work with them, as collaboratively as we can. And that doesn't mean that we're always going to be given the time that we think something is going to, benefit from. But again, it's about intention, right? If we know that there's a possibility here, to have that conversation. And you may have a different conversation at the beginning and the middle, at the end of a research process about, I think you kind of made this point before. We don't know what we don't know. And we don't know necessarily that, wow, there's a brand new surprising thing here that we have some glimmers about. And we propose to spend time on that and bring you something new. So, having those conversations at different points about the investment versus the outcome, I think shifts the frame from, we're under pressure. We're all under pressure, and this is not an us versus them thing. If you can kind of shift that, I think that can, ideally make it a more positive, collaborative discussion.
Yeah, that actually leads very neatly to my next question, because it really is around how do you establish communications in a way that enables you to do that education and that level set and be able to have that happen throughout the process of actually doing the work, so that people get it better. You're the people that you're working with get it more and actually leverage what it is you're bringing to them effectively in their work.
I mean, you put that question so well, because it's about outcomes, right? It's about what we want to have happen and how we want to help people, because I think we're a helping profession. And this is a question that comes up a lot. And sometimes it gets boiled down to what's the output format for a deliverable that will have this magic outcome. And I really like how you how you kind of level that up to sort of communication, which is a relationship thing. It's an ongoing thing. And what I've seen teams do is understand. I mean, this makes sense when you say it, right? We're researchers. Is understand the communication needs and styles of the different stakeholders that we work with, and even what their roles are as part of that. And so maybe something like a RACI model or a DACI model, right? It's a responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. It's you break down what people's roles are, and people are assigned to those roles. And thinking about what's your communication strategy across role, but then also across individuals. And this is harder to do, right? It's not just one thing that you output and ta-da, everybody is kind of engaged, but how do you want to work with different people? Some people are more patient. Some people want to see how the sausage is made. Some people want to have a conversation. Some people want to read something and then have a conversation. If we're in the business of collaborating with those people, do we have bandwidth, or can we be kind of flexible about the ways that we share stuff? And I think you're kind of getting at this well, right? It's all the way along the process to share stuff. And when I sort of started out, I was definitely enamored with the big reveal, the aha. You do something and you come back and say, here's this thing which is going to blow your mind. And that doesn't really work at all. So what are these ways that we can engage with people all along the process? And we're creating new knowledge together. We're not trying to sell someone on something. But so thinking about the relationship, thinking about touch points, thinking about, quick updates and designing a bunch of occasions, many of which can be super lo-fi, and don't have to have sort of formal names, but ways that you're making information available to people that they can kind of dip into, or they can just see that information is accumulating. And that is already awareness, versus here's a report, here's a workshop, here's a deck. I think there's sort of these small things that set up that communication part of the relationship. And I would encourage people to, flex their storytelling muscles and be creative. And again, this idea of, we're not in the business of quoting people and what their asks are. And so I think, again, there's just, I'm cycling back to things. Sometimes people have a less sophisticated view of what value research can bring. And doing that yes and saying, hey, we learned these things that you asked for, and we have something else. I think there's a pushback against researchers. Oh, researchers tend to, not get to the meat quickly enough. I think that's a thing that we're sort of accused of, that, here's all this stuff about process that no one cares about. So give them the action items and then, put your process in an appendix. And, I think that might be generally true. But again, thinking about storytelling as muscles that you can flex in different ways, there might be times in which you want to build up a narrative. And that doesn't mean that the document itself has to have that, but maybe that's the relationship. You build up a narrative over time. You share process artifacts, and that, creates a case where you can, share conclusions having, in a document that doesn't have to rehash that because people have already kind of been there with that. So I think they're storytelling things. And I think sometimes when you say storytelling, people think, oh, I should make a movie. I should do a TikTok. I should, make a video of quotes, or I should put on a play. And I think, yes, I think those are very creative ways to do storytelling. But again, thinking about relationships and thinking about information and, the experience that you're designing for someone to help them have a new understanding of something, is something to be very creative in. And just to repeat myself, you want to anchor that, I think, in those relationships that you have with different kinds of people and different kinds of communication and learning styles in your own organization.
Yeah, I think, what you just said really was very thought provoking. It's just like the researcher as an experienced designer for research stories, and how that really needs to be unique to, the situation that you're in and the people that you're working with, and also just the shape of the data that you've got in front of you. I think I often speak to qualitative research, but also have a pretty significant background in quantitative research. And I see a lot of folks these days drawing together storylines that take advantage of data from both quantitative and qualitative settings. And they're, both very important in being persuasive around changing people's mindset, around people's needs and behaviors and attitudes and preferences and all of that. So yeah, it's a great point. So I have a question that kind of speaks to me. Hopefully it's important to you as well. I think it is, just because, you talk a lot about it in your book, but just really how showing other people, teaching people to do research and actually practicing research are very much related activities that help to, I think, improve both, right? You have to, when people ask you hard questions, you have to come up with better, really sometimes efficient answers, or sometimes inefficient answers, I think, in order to, get to their questions. And I'd love to hear just an example of when trying to guide people along the way, whether it's the doing of the interviews, where I say interviews, just collecting of the data, making the data, or, synthesis or analysis. How has that changed how you approach conducting research?
Yeah, I have a story from a few years ago where I was doing some stakeholder interviews, and my client had arranged a day on site to come and meet a bunch of different people. And one of these stakeholders was someone I'd heard about. I'm here in Silicon Valley. This stakeholder was coming from the Vancouver office. My family lives in Vancouver. I had either just been there or was just going there, like within a day or so of this of these interviews. And so Vancouver was just on my mind. And I don't know, for some reason I was kind of enthusiastic about the person from the Vancouver office. I had sort of a vision of them. And so these are on-site corporate interviews. So we're meeting in a conference room, and she's there first or I'm there first. We come in and we're sort of just trying to, normalize a little bit, kind of do the small talk to get comfortable and then start the conversation. And I was enthusing about Vancouver. Oh, I know you're here today from the Vancouver office. I was just there. My family lives there. Maybe I said something like what neighborhood they live in. And this woman could not have been less interested and was kind of, I read it at the time, and I'll walk this back, but I read it at the time as unfriendly to me. And we had the interview, and the interview was fine and good. And I learned a lot, and it was, great stuff for what we were trying to accomplish. But I was ruminating over it for a few days. I was kind of like, just picture me like muttering to myself, why didn't that woman kind of want to, I was telling her I was friendly and she was not. And at one point I heard myself kind of complaining, again, this was just to myself, but kind of complaining about, how I was treated and how I felt. And it dawned on me. I mean, this is just, it feels kind of dumb, but I will share this. It dawned on me that, of course, why would this person possibly care? They were having a meeting. I was meeting with them. They were asked to come. Their expertise was requested. Why was I possibly talking about myself? And so, I kind of, had a slap the forehead moment. One, in that realization. And then two, because I conjured up the slide that I cover in every workshop and the stuff that I've written about in my books that tells researchers, people learning from me and my teaching, explicitly not to do that. There's a whole protocol that I kind of advise on about not talking about yourself. And the naive researcher thinks that the way that you build rapport is by sharing about yourself. But I'm a firm believer and advocate in that the best way to build rapport is focus on them and not share about yourself unless it's somehow going to be helpful. And, it was a kind of a funny moment, like, who's the person that's written about this and who's the person that has absolutely failed to follow that advice because they gave into some other, other person. That's me. I'm going to hold up my two thumbs and point at myself. I'm the guy that did that. It was sort of I had to kind of laugh at myself and think, well, that makes my teaching better because, I can tell people to do this and I can tell them that I have failed to do that. I think it makes it more tangible to be able to illustrate it. And I think it makes the advice more accessible if even, quote, Steve Portigal, who wrote this book, unquote, like, is also making these mistakes. And your question is, how does that make me a better researcher? Well, there's nothing like making a mistake, seeing it go wrong, realizing the mistake, and then even, slapping your forehead a couple of times. Like, that increases my own mindfulness or my own resolve to be careful about when and how I share about myself. So, yeah, I think I like to have my own mistakes where I can sort of see the principles that I'm teaching and the principles that I'm talking about and writing about and kind of have it all inform each other. And sometimes you figure out something on the page or in the classroom or in a slide deck. And then when it comes up in the field, you're like, oh, yeah, here I am in that thing that was abstract a while ago. And now I can kind of apply it. So they definitely bounce back and forth in every direction. But it's not just mistakes, but I think it's whatever heightens your awareness as you go from one mode of practice to another.
Yeah, and actually it's instructive because I think, mistakes is like part of that class of heightening your awareness. There's the wins too, right? And I think that experience, sometimes bitter experience, is a great way to be able to essentially like figure out the threads that are common across like the things that happen most frequently and help people to be more successful so they don't make the same mistakes. I think, yeah, that's absolutely just a really powerful way to put that. So I think a couple last questions here. And, I'm finding that, again, in this world where we're evolving from being more remote to having some sort of hybrid types of new ways of coming together in community, that I'm seeing people inside the industry and people adjacent, and obviously just in the business world in general, think about different ways of engaging with the communities that are out there. And I think, one of the things that you've talked about is, when you got started, there are fewer of us. And I would say, one of the sayings that one of my old managers used to have about kind of the place of our UX research team at the time was, we're the redheaded stepchildren, which I think, kind of terrible way to think about it. But I think summed up how people felt, like out on the fringes and out, not really listened to. But now we're more in the jungle. And that's different, right? Because there's sometimes sharp elbows and just different dynamics. And so, what advice would you have for people who are just getting started? And, even despite all the challenges I hear from folks every day who are new to the industry, what would you tell them to give them a little bit of practical guidance on how to navigate today's really, I would say, dynamic and challenging environment?
Yeah, we both mentioned sort of community and the number of us, and I think that's just a tremendous resource, and there are many ways to engage with that. And so I would encourage people to experiment and try some things and sort of find what works for them. And you can see it, right? Some people are interested in finding their voice and being public. And so they write or they do podcasts. And I've come across podcasts from people with hardly any experience in the field. And that's a valid approach. That's making something that's engaging and so on. But some people are not interested in being public, and what they're interested in is relationships. And people do networking, and networking is not a bad word. Networking is a good word. It's a thing that it doesn't mean to be inauthentic or to be pitching people or to be being needy from people. It means about engaging with the community. And for some people, that's reading what other people have to say, or sometimes that's commenting on other people, or sometimes that's, seeking out a group of people to form your own little, tiny navigable group with, or joining in groups that are there. And that can be at people that are at the same level as you, or maybe just slightly ahead of you. So I think it's interesting just to look at what you see other people doing in networking and how they're seeking out information and influence and inspiration for themselves and trying different things. So if you're, listening to this or watching this, you might think, oh, I should be following Steve Portigal. He wrote this book, and, I should be following Indie Young, and so on. And yes, there are, people, people like us that have been around and that are, have written books. Yes, please follow us. Please follow Leah, right? We all have things to say, and we want to engage, and we want your attention. But if you're newish to the field, like, who are the people that have 2 years more experience than you do? And who are the people that don't post a lot, but maybe they want to hang out every week on a Zoom chat or join a Slack or a Discord, I guess, and talk about stuff and compare notes. So I think that's untapped. That takes, a little more effort. People like, Leah and I are like, we're making us available, and, we're sort of an easy, obvious follow. But I don't have, 18 months more experience than you. I have decades more if you're new. So the relatability of what I have to offer and the tangibleness of it is like, yeah, you want to sort of diversify, I guess, who you have access to in your community, and seek out some things, and find what's going to work for you, and experiment. And that will change over time as well. I think there's just so many ways to seek this out that is kind of going to be valuable to you specifically.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, just to amplify a little bit on that, it's also embracing the fact that you can't do all the things all at the same time, and that's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There are different seasons in life, and sometimes you just have more energy and time to be able to commit to. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Great point. Great point. So, as we look to the future, I kind of started at the beginning of the conversation a little bit about this, but really would love to hear from you. What do you think is next, if anything? Because I think there are some doomsayers out there too, right? In the UX design and research space.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to offer a provocation. I don't know if I can say it will be next, but I'm going to say that it could be next, and that maybe is up to us. And I'm thinking about, what's the role of research, like really, really big version of that question. You can think back to, an earlier period of time where there was a lot of discussion about design-founded startups, designer founders. And I think maybe Airbnb is the most famous example of that. Then we also had an adjacent conversation about design-led companies. Although, you mentioned doomsayers. I don't know if anyone believes that design-led is a thing anymore. I don't know. But I've long been interested in, and maybe this is a time to kind of bring it up again, like research-founded companies, research-led companies. And just to be, slightly specific, I think you do see companies that are started by user researchers, But sometimes those are an individual career pivot. I got tired of being a researcher, and now I wanted to be, to come bring this product that I'm interested in out into the world. And starting companies and building products as researchers, I think is kind of interesting. And maybe the differences are subtle here. I don't mean a designer who does research, and I think there's something that I can't quite define. And I don't want to sound like I'm gatekeeping about what is a researcher here. I think just in this scenario that I'm kind of, riffing on, what would it mean? And maybe we would have to define this collectively by trying it out. If I'm kind of fantasizing, what would a research-led company bring to the world in terms of showing how products and services could be made? I'm not talking about research being the service, but research being the key ingredient where people are making something and putting it out to the world in a way that researchers would do. And maybe there's an example that I don't know about because maybe that's not the way that company's positioned. I would love to, find some examples of this. And again, I'm not tightly defining it, but I'm sort of interested in that. I can't really predict this is next. It seems like it's an opportunity for the field, that there are people that we know want to do more with what they have to offer as researchers. So I guess I want to just sort of put it out there as a possibility. And maybe there are some weak signals that someone's going to kind of point out to us after this. We can kind of keep talking about it and see if it's not just a next that might happen to us, but a next that we might collectively build as a field. So yeah, I don't know. I'm going to fantasize about it right now and see what that happens by saying it out loud.
Yeah, I think that's a really provocative point, because I think that there's a lot of energy potentially about in this space to kind of move in the direction of being more entrepreneurial. I think the biggest challenge that I perceive is getting the capital to do it and the business acumen to do it. And that's where I think there's probably some opportunity for growth for people who want to go in that direction. But I can totally see that being a direction. So nice. I think that's a great answer, and probably likely, actually, just given some of the signals that I'm seeing out there. Maybe that's a conversation we can continue in the future. Well, thank you so much for this really enlightening conversation. You always have, I think, a very interesting perspective that's informed by so much experience. And I would love to hear more about what you are doing and how people can learn about your thought leadership activities and kind of, maybe obtain copies of your books or listen to your podcast. So just would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. And I mentioned networking and I mentioned LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn. So people are welcome to, follow me there, link to me there, and you can see me post about stuff that I'm doing. I'll post about this podcast when it comes out into the world and other things like that. My own website is portigal.com. And so you can see what services I provide to clients, a little bit about my work and my workshops and some of my speaking and my own research work. And there's a page there for my books. And there's a page there for my podcasts. I've done quite a few interviews with research leaders in 2024. I'm probably taking a little hiatus right now, but there's a lot of episodes there to catch up for people that are new. And if people want to buy interviewing users, then we have a discount code, which is tied to the name of this podcast. The discount code is the word unlocked. And it's good for 30 days from now for 10% off the purchase of the second edition of Interviewing Users, only if you purchase it from the publisher, Rosenfeld Media. And you should support small businesses anyway, I think. So it's a good place to buy all of your UX books is from the publisher. So yeah, I encourage people to check that out. And there's some samples and some resources there that people can get a little taste of and see if it's something that they they want to buy.
Yeah, I cannot more highly recommend checking out Rosenfeld Media. If you are a UX researcher or designer, you need to know about the books and the conferences that Lou and his team curate. They're awesome. So again, thank you so much for your time.
It's great to chat with you. Thanks for all the questions and the discussion.
Thanks.